and many are animated and things like that. One is motion capture. The Jim Carrey one was motion capture. So you don't see the real person, but he stood in front of the camera and made gestures and move his features, and the computer would capture it and create the animated version based on his movement. Yeah, which is very interesting. But I'm going to concentrate on these 4 because there are just too many of them to talk about. Then I will talk about Charles Dickens because he's a very, very important person in literature, especially in British literature.
Excuse me, Joe, but I don't see your whole face. I only saw upper half of you.
Oh, me? Okay.
Is that just me? I don't know. Now I see you.
Face. Yes. Yeah, that's because for once I can't see myself on the screen, so I can adjust. But okay. For many, many months, I could not see myself. So that's okay. Okay, like this. Could someone tell us what the story was about?
Well, I don't know who wants to talk, but okay, I'll start. I watched many versions, not the Patrick Stewart one. I don't particularly care for him, even though he's an excellent actor. Anyway, I watched all the others different times years ago, but this time I watched the older, the 1951 version again. I love that version. I like the black and white, the effect, and I like the setting. But the one that impressed me the most, I think that's Charles Dickens's whole the idea, the whole theme of the book is that it's wonderful that you get a second chance. That I wish I'm looking back at some of the things I've done in the past or I didn't do. If I had given another chance, maybe, I'll do it differently or something like that. So I thought that was very inspiring, and it's uplifting that that people can do good, and do have inside of them. And you just have to bring it out, So I thought that was great, and the acting was very good. I think it's very nice. I liked it a lot.
Okay, yeah. As I grow older, I tend to think that people are really hard to change. You cannot change people, but this really gives you hope about how a person like that can overnight become so different.
Yeah, that's why it's a story, but it's a nice story.
It's really quite an inspired, imaginative story about 3 ghosts coming to visit him at hourly visit. Yes. It's really interesting. Yeah, and it's considered a children's book.
Yeah,
because it's easy for children to understand or to imagine things described in the story. It's fun to read and to watch. Yeah. So this very stingy miser, what we call it, this
小气鬼，吝啬鬼。
cheapskate 就是一个很吝啬的人哈。In this story, his name is Ebenezer Scrooge. Since then, people use his name when they say somebody was very stingy, they would call him a Scrooge. That's not the meaning of this word, but it is the character of this story. So he is like that. Yeah. And first, there was a ghost of his dead associate who was also a businessman and made lots of money, but is now in hell. And Jacob Marley came to Scrooge's home and told him that he should expect to see 3 ghosts, and they are the Christmas past, present, and the future. And surely these ghosts came to visit him according to the prediction, and he looked back over his life, how he was young and lonely as a child, and then had a girlfriend, and then he was plunged into money making and ignored his social and personal life, and became just so cold and hardened. So in the present, his nephew and his hired hand, they both wanted him to be differently. And in the future, he really saw that when he died, and nobody cared about him. And he saw his grave with the tombstone, and he just couldn't bear it anymore. And when he woke up, he changed it entirely, so much and so differently. It's a heartwarming story, and it's really tells a lot about the Christmas spirit. However, according to what I found, in that country, which was England, during that time, people don't celebrate Christmas so much. But after they read his story, it became more and more fashionable to celebrate Christmas. That's how much influence he had over others. So he's a very important person in the life of people in the world, actually. This is not a short story and not a novel. It's called a novella, which is in between, 中篇小说. It was published in 1843. And within a year, it sold 13 editions, 重印了13次 within a year. And then he began public readings. That is, he would go to a theater and just stand there or sit down and read the story, because it's not long. So he would read this as if people would go to a theater to watch a show or a play or a movie. So he did the public reading of this particular novella over 100 times in his lifetime until the year he died. So he was quite a celebrity. Everybody wanted to see him in person. And this book, it's been more than 150 years since it was published. It was never out of print. That is, throughout the 150 years, people could go and buy this book. It's never out of print. And it's been adapted into movies, stage play or opera or musical, and many other media. So if you go on YouTube, you can see so many of this. And there are many of Charles Dickens' novels that are like that. If you go to YouTube, you can see lots of his other famous stories adapted into movies and other forms. In this movie, you could hear the word humbug, which means a hoax or imposter, a cheat, a person who cheat, or something which is fake. And in this story, Scrooge always, when people mention Christmas, he would say, bah, humbug, which means that he looked down upon this celebration of Christmas, and he thinks it's just a fake thing. It's nothing worthwhile to talk about. To him, Christmas is for maybe for regular people, but not for him at all. He is above that. Actually, nowadays, Christmas has been so hyped that it's really kind of humbug. Now, there are two slides which I don't expect you to read. These are the adaptation of Christmas Carol in movies and on TV. So there are just tons of them there. And because of this story, there are several things that became regularly heard of in life. One is Merry Christmas. And before that, people used to say Happy Christmas or other things. But because Dickens said Merry Christmas in this story, so most of people, when they wish people a Merry Christmas, they would say Merry Christmas instead of Happy Christmas. Another word that was popularized by this book is bah humbug. And another term that is now common is Scrooge. When you want to say somebody who is a miser, we say he is a Scrooge. It's already added in the Oxford English Dictionary. This is what I just mentioned. In early 19th century, people don't celebrate Christmas too much because of urbanization and industrialization. People left their farms in the country and moved to the city to work and to earn a living. They are far from their family at home. And at that time, travel or transportation was not as effective as it is now. So people slowly stopped celebrating Christmas. It is something for peasants 就是农夫哈. So it's for countryside and the peasant to celebrate the Christmas. But starting with this book, people gradually warm up to the celebration during Christmas time, and the families got together because it's now more fashionable and it feels very good. Yeah. Having a family affair, celebrating a good holiday is really a good thing for the society as a whole. And because of a Christmas Carol in this book that Dickens wrote, people in towns and the cities also started to go back in history and celebrate Christmas as it was not popular at that time. And in this story, he advocated a humanitarian focus on the holiday. So it's not just someday you go to the church to pray or to have a feast or something. It is mainly for people to get together and to be happy with each other. Things like family gathering, seasonal food and drink, dance and games, and the festive generosity of spirit. This is important. The generosity of spirit 就是一种很怎么说呢？就是不是很小气的哈，大家在一起就很快乐，而且很宽容，对别人也很宽容，对那个钱的事情也很宽容的意思哈。So he linked worship and feasting within a context of social reconciliation. It's like in the end of the story, Scrooge is a changed person. So he went to visit his employee, Bob Cratchit, and he went to visit to go to attend the Christmas feast at his nephew's home. So these meant in the context of social reconciliation. Reconciliation 就是本来两个人互相有仇恨或者吵架或者疏远了，那现在就有这个重新又回到这种和好的这种情形，这叫做 social reconciliation. So I'm going to go over these 4 movies. Some are called Scrooge, some are called A Christmas Carol. This is the first one, even though the poster is colored, it is a black and white movie. And the main character in this story, there is only one main character, and that's Alistair Sim playing Scrooge. And in many other stories, there are a lot of different characters. I mean, Dickens novels. So here is this main actor who played Scrooge, and the movie is black and white. And there are at least 5 Christmas Carol adaptation before this one, but because they probably were, most of them were silent movies and certainly had no color. So when people think about an old movie of this story, they inevitably would be thinking about this particular one, which is a 1951 movie. And the main character, here's a picture of him. It's called Alistair Sim. And he was a popular stage actor. Because today we're going to talk about mainly British actors and actresses. They almost always were stage actors, particularly Shakespearean stage actors. And they were well trained, unlike this actors and actresses in America. They were usually not well trained at all. A very few handful would be well trained in maybe acting school or at Juilliard or so on. But in England, almost everyone was trained very rigorously for the stage in the beginning. So this person is no exception, and he was a stage actor in many movies. But he also appeared in more than 50 movies. He was on. Yes.
Yeah. What does that CBE mean? Stands for?
I don't really know, but it is some kind of a knight. They were knighted by the queen, or maybe by the king, but most of them were knighted by the queen nowadays.
I see.
Yeah, or you can say Sir something, then we know he's a knight. And if it's a woman, it would be a dame, D-A-M-E, in the front. Many of them would be called. I once looked into that, but I forgot, because there were 5 different levels of this kind of knight.
Okay.
So I couldn't tell them apart.
Okay. I'll Google it. Thank you.
Yeah. So he was a dramatic actor, but most people remember him as always playing someone who's very comically sinister performances. So his performances are usually as roles that are comical and sinister, which means 坏人哈。所以他演的电影很多是喜剧的，而是演坏人的。虽然他是演了很多的正派的角色，like this one is not at all comically sinister, but people tend to remember acting that are comically sinister more than the straight, serious dramatic roles. So that's him. He looks like he's probably Scottish or something. And because he was so old, I mean, he was born so long ago that I'm sure most of us do not know much about him. But starting with the next one, some of you could have watched them in different movies. And this one is Albert Finney. And I can show you some Albert Finney. When he's older, he looked like this. And that reminds me of him in Erin Brockovich, in which Julia Roberts won an Oscar for playing Erin Brockovich. And when he was young, he was famous for these roles. And on the left-hand side is Tom Jones. Tom Jones is a famous character in a famous British novel. I think it's called the Tom Jones, but the author was Henry Fielding, I think. And on the right, it's probably in a movie called The Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. So during those days when he was young, he was playing some very happy-go-lucky guy, just very happy and not really a good person because he was young and he often makes mistakes or not respecting the law. But as he grows older, he looks like this, and he became more respectable, and he was in the movie Annie as Daddy Warbuck. That was a musical too. I'm going to show you a slide about many of his movies, but he was in a lot of movies and won a lot of awards, had a very successful and long career in theater, film, and television. And he was, as late as in 2002, very active playing Winston Churchill, 就是丘吉尔, in the movie called The Gathering Storm, and received many awards. So he was really famous when he was very young. So he had an illustrious career throughout many, many decades. Okay, and these are some of the movies he appeared in. Some are very serious, as in The Entertainer. That was a movie he was in against Laurence Olivier. That was a very serious British stage play. And at the bottom of this side, The Dresser was also a very dark British black and white movie. And he was a bossy actor in this movie, while Tom Courtenay played his like a butler. Yeah. So these are, when you talk about serious modern day British plays on stage, these are two very typical plays. However, on the other hand, he was in many raucous movies that we don't associate with traditional British plays, like in Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. And Tom Jones was a period piece. As I mentioned just now, the novelist was Henry Fielding. So that was a very old story which was made into a play, and he was in the movie. I mean, Albert Finney was in the movie. And Two for the Road, I don't know if any of you have seen it, because I have, and it was Albert Finney and Audrey Hepburn in a very unlikely match of a couple who, when they were very young, they fell in love, and they went on a trip in Europe here and there, and then they fought all the time. That is more or less a story about a couple fighting between themselves. And that was a pretty well-received movie. Then he was in Scrooge. You could say that he became a middle-aged person since then. Before that, he was a young man in movies or on stage. So after that, I just mentioned Annie was a musical, which was a big hit on Broadway, not with him in it, before 1982. It was on Broadway for maybe 20 years or something like that. So it has the leading actress is a young girl in an orphanage. So if you have a show that lasted 20 years with a young girl, you have to be constantly changing the actress who plays this little girl. And so it created many young actresses who went on to become in other movies. Then we go to the right-hand side. The Miller's Crossing is probably a Martin Scorsese movie about mafia, like those criminals who kill people a lot. Okay. Aaron Brockovich is with Julia Roberts, and Big Fish has what's his name? Jessica Lange, and the man who is more important. I couldn't think of his name. I just thought about him yesterday when I could remember his name. Anyway, Bourne Ultimatum is one of a series of spy movies. The first one was Bourne Identity with Matt Damon. Okay, but this one is maybe the third in the series. Skyfall is one of the 007 movies with Daniel Craig. So he's no longer the leading man in these movies. On the right-hand side, he was a supporting actor, and he won some Oscars for supporting roles as well. But nowadays, people probably don't remember him too much. But George C. Scott, in our lifetime, we should know him well because he won an Oscar for Patton. He was General Patton in World War II, and when he won an Oscar, he refused to accept it. He told them that he's not going to appear for the show, the award show, and he didn't come. So someone else received the Oscar in place of him. And the next day, that someone had to return it because he wouldn't accept it. Okay, so that's one famous thing about George C. Scott. This movie is released in 1984, in which the director was an editor in the 1951 movie Scrooge. So he participated in the previous movie, the first one we talked about, the black and white movie, and he went on to become a director. Actually, not many people just went into the movie industry and become a director. They usually were doing something else. For example, they were the cameraman or the writer, the script writer, and they may be doing other things here and there, and then they feel that they would do the big job, and they became a director. I would say, yeah, all the directors, probably most of the directors were previously doing something else in the movie production. Here we have George C. Scott. I think this is him in a movie called The Hustler with Paul Newman and Jackie Gleason. He was a manager, and he has this tough guy look. So he's never, hardly ever in a romantic role. He's always the tough guy or a villain in a movie. Here I had this word gruff highlighted. That's a word that describes him. If you don't know what the word means, it means rough edges and temperamental and very hard to deal with. That's his demeanor, means behavior. He acted in a gruff way. That's what the demeanor means. And a derivative of the word demeanor is oh no, I'm sorry, it's not. Okay. So he became known for his portrayal of stern but complex authority figures. Okay, I need to put this demeanor. I think so. Right? Okay. So 很严肃，可是很复杂的哈，不是那嘻嘻哈哈的、七八糟的，随便he just looks like he is very deliberate, and he's always thinking ahead of how to deal with you or how to treat you badly or something like that. So it's easier for such portrayals to become more appreciated. Almost there were no comedy voted as the best picture, or no comedian voted as the best actor, because people think it's too easy. You're just doing everyday thing. You're not really engaged in some serious work that requires a lot of thinking and preparation. So people like him get recognized for his acting because he's always playing very difficult roles. And there are some of the movies. It was his second movie, The Anatomy of a Murder. I think we call it 桃色血案. It has Jimmy Stewart and Lee Remick and many other people in it. It's a courtroom drama. It was his George C. Scott's second movie, and he, I think he got an Oscar for a supporting role, or The Hustler. Maybe he was nominated for both of them. So he went on the scene and was instantly recognized and won lots of nominations. Power and the Glory. Of his movies, probably the most famous, in addition to Patton, would be Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. It is a satire about people taking nuclear weapon lightly, and the director is Stanley Kubrick. And that was for many decades, very, very respected movie. And if you haven't seen that, it is like a comedy, but it's very serious because we're dealing with atomic bomb here. And he was in The Crucible, which is Arthur Miller's play, and it was repeatedly adapted into movies. I've seen at least two of them. The one I saw had Daniel Day-Lewis and Winona Ryder. But that's not this one. Patton is very famous. When that movie came out, and everyone knew that George C. Scott was going to get an Oscar for that movie. He also knew that, but he declined before, in advance. He said, I'm not going to get it. But that was his new attitude. He accepted several Oscars. I'm not quite sure, but maybe for both Anatomy of a Murder and for The Hustler. He very happily accepted the recognition from his peers. when he won the Academy Award, but then he became very jaded. He thought the movie industry is a farce. He thinks this is just like a circus, putting actors and so on the stage so that everybody could laugh at those people who did not win. So he didn't want to be there. Nowadays, if you have seen an award show that's being broadcast live, you could see that for every category, for example, director, there are 5 people being nominated, and they were all sitting there in the audience, and the cameras would put their 5 pictures on the screen. And when the winner was announced, one of them will be so happy, and the other 4 would be not so happy or even very unhappy. So George C. Scott thinks that it's very cruel to treat people like that. So he did not want to be part of the award show. And Jane Eyre is also a movie that was frequently adapted from the novel by Charlotte Bronte. And I've seen probably 5, 6, or 7 versions of that because it's so popular. The New Centurion, he was a cop, and The Day of the Dolphin is about 2 scientists, he and his wife, doing research on the dolphins, because dolphins are so smart that they have their own language and communicate with them among themselves, and the scientists would try to learn their language. Okay, the Hindenburg, the Beauty and the Beast, the Moving, the Changeling. So there's a variety of different genre of movie that he was in. For example, Firestarter was a horror movie with a little girl who is a fire starter. She could start a fire just by looking at something. So that's how weird his range is. There was Oliver Twist right above that, and the Taps, it's about soldiers, and Christmas Carol. So Christmas Carol is later in his career. So he was a strong, tough businessman in most of the earlier movies. But in Christmas Carol, he's really an old man. Mussolini, I think he was... I don't know if he is still playing important roles, but looks like he is, even when he was old. So I'm assuming he probably played Mussolini. Mussolini is a dictator in Italy during the Second World War, but I have not seen that movie. The Exorcist is, I don't know how you call that in Chinese. I should have known, but exorcist is in Catholic Church when somebody was a devil or somebody got hold of usually a child, or it doesn't have to be a child. Then this child, as in this movie, the first one, The Exorcist, he would throw up and he would make the bed rise and the things fly around and so on. And the priest would come here to act as the exorcist to calm the person down and to chase away the devil. That's what it means. But this is so popular as a horror movie that they made many sequels of it. But at least the last 2 are still quite important roles for him. 12 Angry Men was a courtroom drama with a jury of 12 people deliberating a murder case. And the original one was had Henry Fonda as the person that George C. Scott is playing, I guess. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful piece of work. If you can watch one of them, it's good. I think George C. Scott's version is free on YouTube, so you can try that. And we talked about Inherit the Wind, which is about the Scope monkey trial, about teaching high school students Darwinism, the evolution theory. It's in the state of Tennessee in maybe 1925. They passed a law that high school should not teach Darwinism. 达尔文的进化论 So ACLU, which is America's good legal association, American Civil Liberty Union, ACLU thought out, they found a high school teacher and asked him to teach Darwinism, and he was arrested for doing that. And this is a courtroom drama about that. I think George C. Scott, being the villain most of the time, he plays that the role that's the presidential candidate. In this story, the stage and the movie, they had all the names changed, so I don't remember too much about the roles. There is Clarence Darrow, who represents ACLU and represent the high school teacher. And on the other hand, there was this big shot statesman who was trying to run for president. And there's a reporter, H.L. Mencken. So there are three parties in this story, in addition to the high school teacher who has very little screen time. So these are all good movies he was in, George C. Scott. If you could watch any of them, he is a good actor. So this, I've talked about them already. His second film role is Anatomy of a Murder, and he got his first Oscar nomination, but of course he won the Best Actor for Patton and refused to accept it. And he believes that it's impossible to compare the acting between 2 or 5 actors because each role is so different. You cannot possibly compare who is better. So he didn't think it makes any sense to have such a award show or such a film festival. Here I particularly put down his marriages. He had several wives. He married 5 times, and twice he was married to Colleen Dewhurst as his third and fourth marriage. But the days of the dolphin was when he was married to the last wife, Trish Vanderveer, and they played a couple in there. And Colleen Dewhurst was a great actress. She was in a lot of movies and in a lot of stage plays. And they were a great pair, but of course they were both too strong in personality, so they would get married and get divorced twice. And here is a picture of one of his sons, and he also became a movie star and also a producer and a director, and he looked very handsome when he was young, but now he's old. Of course, everybody is. So he was in several famous movies. Okay. He was not the Amazing Spider-Man. He was the Spider-Man's father, I think. I think Spider-Man was played by Andrew Garfield in those movies. But Singles is very well known for being filmed in Seattle. So even nowadays, occasionally when you watch TV, they would say something about this movie. And it's about young people in Seattle. Maybe they share a house together and there are different people having different things happening to them. But it's also famous for having many of Seattle's favorite grunge musicians appearing in that movie. People like Green Days or maybe the one who committed suicide. Cobain, what's his first name? He went to a gun shop on Lake City Way, if you know. That's a street that's very close to my home, and bought a gun and killed himself in Madrona. His house is in Madrona. How come I could not remember his first name? Not Chris Cobain. Something Cobain, Cobain. What's his last name? And okay. And the next one is Patrick Stewart. I found that very interesting. Not only is photography and other things were pretty well done, but it's got details that were not in the other movies. Because I haven't read the book, so I don't know whether it's
Cobain.
Kurt Cobain. Yes, Kurt, K-U-R-T, Kurt Cobain. Yeah. Okay, so they were it was in a time in Seattle that's called the grunge movement. They were rebellious, unhappy with their life. And Kurt Cobain was born and raised in Aberdeen, which is on the coast in Washington State. And so these people, they make music that are very different from people in the past. This is very interesting in one respect, because Patrick Stewart was a very famous actor, and he decided to go on the one-man show. One-man show, meaning the entire play, there was only one actor. It could also be a one-woman show. I've seen some one-man shows like Henry Fonda in Clarence Darrow. It's usually about the story of a famous person's life. Yeah, I've seen a Broadway show called Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson is in Massachusetts. She was a not famous poet, but now she's extremely famous for her wonderful poems. But during his lifetime, her poems were not published. Nobody knew him when she was alive, except for his family and friends. So that was an interesting one-woman show about Emily Dickinson. And this one-man show is not about a famous person, but it's about A Christmas Carol. And Patrick Stewart went on Broadway stage, and by himself. It's not just a book reading. He is in a play, playing Scrooge, doing all the things while there were no one else on stage. So it's a one-man show called Christmas Carol, and it did very well on Broadway and in London. Almost all the popular shows were eventually on Broadway and in London on West End. So he was on stage for many, many times, and because of that, they decided to do a real movie with him playing Scrooge with other people. So it's very easy for him to take on this role. And he is apparently bald. So we almost, since when we knew him early on, he was already bald, so he had no hair. I wonder if he must have had hair before, but I don't know that. Okay, he's a very famous actor, and most people knew him because he was in Star Trek on TV, or in X-Men in movies. But he is a lot more than that. He was doing lots of Shakespearean plays and on TV and video games. He did a lot of voice acting, playing his own roles in video games, I guess. I'm not familiar with his video games, but he could be playing Professor Xavier in the X-Men or something. Those could possibly be some of the video games. And he has won a lot of accolades, including nomination for Olivier Award. Olivier Award is a National Theatre Award in London, named after Laurence Olivier. And the Tony, Golden Globe, Emmy, all these are in America. SAG Award is stands for Screen Actors Guild Awards. And he was knighted by the Queen. So I should have put Sir in front of his name and maybe CBE after his name. He was knighted by the Queen in 2010. In the year 2003, I went to London and I went to theater a lot. Probably I went to 9 of them, and one of them with Patrick Stewart on stage. He was a master builder in the play called The Master Builder that was written by Ibsen. Yeah. And because I went to all the plays I bought the cheapest ticket. So I watched his play by looking at his bald head. I was probably 8 stories high in the audience. So afterwards, I came down more than 100 steps. Okay, I think I counted, but I don't remember how many steps. But that was really interesting, yeah. And he was married several times, and recently either he got a divorce or he was preparing for divorce with Ally McBeal, the actress. What's her name? I forgot. Anyway, he when I saw him on stage in Master Builder, there was a young lady in the play who plays 2 roles alternately. So one day she would play the daughter, and another night she would play the secretary or something. And she and Patrick Stewart were romantically involved at that time, I heard, and later they separated. So all these people were married about 5 times on average. He went really famous because of Star Trek in America, but he was probably already famous in London on stage for years. But he became very, very famous in America because he was playing Captain Picard in Star Trek: The Next Generation, which was also made into a movie more than once. But there are so many parts in his career. So Star Trek was one of them, and X-Men was another one. He was in many of the X-Men series. X-Men would have many sequels and many spin-offs. What I mean by spin-off is one of the characters became so famous that they made a new movie based on this character in the different story, sometimes without other characters in the X-Men movies. So in this movie with Hugh Jackman, he played Wolverine, and because he became a very famous actor himself. So there is a spin-off movie called The Wolverine, because I only saw X-Men first. I don't know anything that happened. So I don't know if Logan is also a role in that movie, but both Wolverine and Logan had Hugh Jackman in it. Yeah, I like Hugh Jackman very much. and he does a lot of voice work. If there's a animated movie, they would hire him. He has a very dramatic voice. So when you look at it, in the very beginning, he was in Hedda, and probably Wu Qi saw this on YouTube. Yeah, I told you about Hedda Gabler. That was an Ibsen play, and you can see this. It's a wonderful play, very complicated story, and that was Patrick Stewart's earliest movie. And then he was in Excalibur, which is the name of the sword of King Arthur. King Arthur, as a child, he passed by a stone with a sword in it, and he pulled the sword out, and that is Excalibur. That's how he became king, because it was predicted that the person who could pull out the sword will be the king. In our language, we call the Disney cartoon Sword in the Stone, 石中剑. That's a story of King Arthur, which is by itself a very, very famous legend in not just England, but also in France. And Dune, these are the earlier movies before Star Trek. Star Trek was in 1994. So all these movies he was in, but I was not aware of him until Star Trek. Then you cannot avoid hearing about him because it became so famous. And so that's one part. Before Star Trek is one part of his career. The next part is Star Trek. And then the next part is X-Men. All these were huge, huge part of his life. And he was also on television. On the right-hand side, you had North and South, which also had Patrick Swayze there. Anthony and Cleopatra. I, Claudius was a PBS series from BBC, of course. BBC is a big entity in UK, and they engage in a lot of movie and the TV production based on their material, such as Shakespeare or Charles Dickens and things like that. And they also did a lot about the Roman Empire. He did Pope John Paul II. So on the right-hand side, you're looking at television. There's a movie, Moby Dick, that was, that name escaped me. Herman Melville. Okay, Herman Melville's story about the great white whale. 我们中文就叫做白鲸记. I saw the movie with Gregory Peck playing Captain Ahab. And in this newer version, Moby Dick, or Captain Ahab was played by Patrick Stewart, but Gregory Peck also appeared in that movie, I heard. They like to do that. Gregory Peck was in Cape Fear, 恐怖角, as a good guy, with Robert Mitchum playing the bad guy. And later on, when they remade that movie with Robert De Niro, they also had the Gregory Peck playing some other supporting roles in the same movie. And The Lion in Winter was first made a movie with Peter O'Toole in it. And Katharine Hepburn won an Oscar for that, but that was in the last century. This one is in this century. And he continued to be on stage, and which was made into TV movies in plays like Hamlet, Macbeth, and Richard II. These were all Shakespearean plays. Okay. I would like to skip the next part, which talks about more of the movies, but because I wanted to go over to Charles Dickens. Okay, so these are what. Okay, so let's do this. Charles Dickens was born in 1812, and died in 1870. So that's like 58 years. We call him a writer and a social critic because in his life, he suffered a great deal because of the poor family during the great industrial revolution, 工业革命的时候, the country suddenly boomed and some people were making huge amount of money while others were just lived as slaves. They could not eat, they could not buy clothes, and Charles Dickens was one of them. When he was 12 years old, his father was arrested and put in jail because he could not pay back the debt he owed to somebody. So at that time, there were jails for people who could not pay their debt, which is really ironic because you put them in jail, you create more suffering for their family because they cannot take care of their children as well. So Charles Dickens was one of those children. At age 12, his father went to prison because of being poor. And he was put in a factory 12 when he was 12. He was in a factory producing shoe shine, blacks, they call it blacks, 就是黑鞋油哈, boots blacking. Let me see this, how it's called. Shoe blacking factory. Okay, shoe blacking factory. That's what he was doing. And he was so hungry and cold and hardworking because at that time there's no maximum work hours. So they would work 12 hours, 16 hours a day, and he was falling asleep while he was working. That's how terrible the situation was for poor people in that country. Behind all that imperialistic glamour, it was built on the backs of many poor people. Let's don't get ahead of ourselves. So he was known. He is famous for two things about his stories. One is the novel. The stories in the novel became so popular that he became the world's most popular writer. On the other hand, the characters he created in his stories, they are so fantastically strange, weird, and lively that almost all the people who read his novels, that means everybody, they love the characters and they know those characters as if they were their friends. So he was very famous at that time. His work enjoyed unprecedented popularity during his time. 一直到现在都是非常非常的有名, and people consider him a literary genius because he described things so vividly, and especially creating those characters so memorable. People think that there's no one after him who could compare with him. Here's a picture from a book. It's a 插图, illustration in a book that's called Life of Charles Dickens. So there's this book that described his experiences in his life. So it's a biography of Charles Dickens called Life of Charles Dickens. And this picture shows that when he was 12 years old, he worked at the shoe blacking factory and fell asleep at work. We call him a 狄更斯. So he was a writer, a journalist. He edited a weekly journal, 所以是一个星期周刊 weekly journal. He's an editor, 就是他是一个编辑 for 20 years, but he himself wrote novels and novellas and hundreds of short stories and nonfiction articles. Because of his experience, he thinks this society is so wrong and needs to be reformed. So he being so famous and people all listen to him, so he was an advocate for social reform. For education, the poor people needs to be educated in order to get a life or get a job that can pay better. And children's rights, at that time, children had no right. People just put them to work endlessly and pay them very little. Children, it was just a horrible place for children to live. So he, as a famous advocate, would bring people's attention to such misery in the society. Here is a word called indefatigable, which means he never gets tired. This in means no. You cannot make him tired of things. He writes a lot of letters. That's what it means to say he is an indefatigable letter writer. Of course, he also writes many other things. He became suddenly very famous in 1836 for writing the book called The Pickwick Papers. And like all the paper, this one is the first one. All his novels were published, were serialized, 就是连载小说. There's Chinese near the bottom of this slide, which says 连载小说. At that time, he was one of the very first novelists to put his work on some kind of magazine or periodical or journals on a regular basis. It could be weekly or monthly. And every month, most of them were monthly, and the people would read a part of it this week and then wait for the next one. So because of this format, many of them have cliffhangers. Let me see, where is the word cliffhanger? In Chinese, we would call it 且听下回分解. So you would tell this story, and when it comes to a very critical moment, you don't know what's going to happen, and you were really anxious to read the next one. Then throughout this month, you would count your days until the day you could finally read the next one, and then you would come across the next cliffhanger. 就是好像挂在悬崖上的样子哈. That's what it means. That's the serialized publication. Here we have in the first bullet, serial publication of the Pickwick paper. That was the first serialized novel he wrote, which became instantly very famous. And it also sparked merchandising and spin-offs. These two things are now, we're very familiar with these two things. For example, you have a Disney movie, for example, Frozen, and then you would have Elsa and Anna, the two characters, and they would be on the backpacks or skirt or this and that. All those things were merchandise that goes along with this product. Disney is very good at such things. And if you make something that you put, say, Snow White on your product, they're going to sue after you, definitely. Okay, so that's merchandise. And the other thing is spin-off, like the X-Men movie I talked about just now with Hugh Jackman in it, and he became the leading character. He played the leading role in the spin-off movie called the Wolverine. His character is called Wolverine, which is a kind of wolf, maybe shorter or slenderer, anyway, Wolverine. And he, if you have seen X-Men, he is somebody whose fingernails are very long and made of steel. So regularly he would have regular hands and fingers, but when he's angry, his fingernails would come out with 5 sharp and very long steel, made of steel. Of course, it's not logical, but that's what Wolverine was. So that's a spin-off movie that came from the main feature movie, which was X-Men. And Pickwick was probably one of the first novels to create, to spark or to bring on merchandising and spin-offs. I've read about because it comes out once a month, and people in London would go to buy the magazine right away, but people who read the same story in New York, they would go to the dock, New York City dock, waiting for the ship to arrive. That ship would bring the new installation of this story. That's how popular Pickwick papers were during that time. Hordes of New York City people would go to the dock to wait for that magazine. Within a few years, Dickens had become an international literary celebrity, famous for his humor, satire, and a keen observation of character and society. He is some good writer because everybody just instantly grew fond of his stories and the characters he created. And when you talk about the serialized fictions, it was a phenomenon of the time, and it became popular in China, in Japan, in France, and I'm sure in most of other countries that heard about it. It became very popular. When we were little, for example, we would read 武侠小说 in the newspaper. And in France, you have Dumas, which is 大众嘛, Dumas' many novels were serialized in the newspaper, and of course he made a lot of money too. For example, The Count of Monte Cristo, 就是基督山恩仇记, that was a serialized fiction. And in Japan, you had for example, 金色夜叉, that was serialized in the newspaper. Yeah, when I was in Atami, 热海, they had the statue of a scene of 金色夜叉, whereby the main character, the main, throw the woman on the ground, and the woman was lying on the ground like that. Nowadays, it's not politically correct to treat women like that, but at that time, in Japan especially, men slapping a woman is very common, I'm sure. But those are all serialized novels. He became the most famous celebrity of his time, and he did public readings, and the word Dickensian was created, which means Dickens-like, like Dickens. So if a story is, if a situation is dire, very poor, and people live in squalid condition, we would call they were having a Dickensian life, or their life was Dickensian. That's the word, meaning poor and deprived and starving and things like that. And another meaning also about this word Dickensian is about characters in the stories. If a man is so weird or so glaringly comical, we would call that person Dickensian. For example, if you have watched Seinfeld on TV, and it's a story about 4 New Yorkers. There's a Seinfeld with Jerry Seinfeld and George Costanzo, and this one I was going to talk about, Michael Richards, who he's playing this very weird character. Kramer, yes, okay. And that kind of character, people would call him, that character is a Dickensian character, because he's a very exaggerated thinking and movements. And it just so happened that Michael Richards was in the Dickens movie playing his most famous character, Micawber, and we're going to talk about that too. So characters are real life person who are outrageously strange or comical or things like that. We would call them Dickensian. And if people live in a very poor condition, we can also say that condition is Dickensian. That's how much people know about this name. He is just very, very famous. These are some of his novels. I just mentioned he had 15 novels, and these are some of the very famous, including one that is not a novel, that is Christmas Carol, which is a novella. So most of them are full length or extra long novels, but the Christmas Carol is very short. And just about every one of them was adapted into a movie, especially by BBC on TV. Many of them repeatedly, actually, again and again, maybe 5 times or more. The first time I know about Dickens was I watched the movie, the last one, Great Expectations. I was quite impressed by that movie. That was one of his very last work, and people say that on the left-hand side of the screen, he was writing as a young man, and on the right-hand side, he was an adult. He was very much matured, starting with David Copperfield. So I've watched many of his movies, and he is just a great writer. That's all I can say. From the first famous story, The Pickwick Paper, it was about a funny, wealthy, and old gentleman called Pickwick, and he gathered a few friends, and he suggests that they would go out travel and report their travel experience. He expected them to make funny mistakes, like throwing the fishing pole and the hook would catch on their body, or things like that, all sorts of funny things. And it's a comical story, and it became quite popular. So it's a publishing phenomenon, which means 在这个印刷界是变成一个非常没有前无古人的一个奇景哈。So there are bootleg copies, which means people print illegal copies of the book, because it's so popular. It's like printing money. You can always sell them. And there's theatrical performances. And Sam Weller is an important figure in that serialized book. Sam Weller appeared in the 4th episode of Pickwick Papers, and from then on, the book just took off. People loved Sam Weller instead of Pickwick. Literature is not so this critics say that you cannot describe Dickens as a literary person. He is much more than that. He's into entertainment, so it's bigger than literature. Okay, and in 20 months, they issued 19 issues. So they probably skipped one or two. So it's a monthly, serialized monthly. Here's the word cliffhanger that I was looking for. Cliff 就是一个悬崖哈 ，cliffhanger 就是 when you tell a story toward the important part when a person was hanging on the cliff, it stopped. You have to wait another month to read the next episode. In our culture, we have 说书的人哈 people would be in the on the stage in the theater, and a person would tell you, for example, 三国演义 or 水浒传. The person would tell you about one chapter or two, and at the end of it, he said, that is for today. I come back tomorrow or next week or whatever. So that's a cliffhanger. And it was heavily utilized by these serialized books. But in China, we had 章回小说 that's like 300 years or 200 years before them. So these are the Pickwick Papers movies. Three of them were made in UK. And this is one movie poster, but I have not read the book or watched any of these movies. This interesting fact about it is in 1954, it became the first British movie to be shown in the Soviet Union after the Second World War. At that time, the Cold War has begun, and they do not have much cultural exchange between the Soviet Union and the British movie industry. But this was the first movie that went to Russia. This movie is probably much more famous, and you might have seen it. It's called Oliver Twist. That is the name of the orphan in that story. And we probably call it Gu Chu Lei. And when I talk about it with the friend from Shanghai, she said that they call it Udu Gu, or Udu means London, yeah, because it's very foggy most of the time. And in Hong Kong, they call it Ku Hai Gu Chu. We sometimes call it Ku Hai Gu Chu. I've seen this, I read this and I've seen this movies, but this new one in when I was young in maybe 67, it's a musical called the Gu Chu Lei. It is almost most of Charles Dickens' stories started with an orphan who was in a very poor situation, usually in an orphanage or in a relative's home. And then how he, because of his perseverance, his hard work, and his integrity, this person is always an honest, straightforward, good person and kind. This is always the case for a Dickens character, leading character. He's very kind and hardworking, and came from very poor family. So in the first part of all these stories, you would see cruel treatment of children. It's just unbearably terrible for people to read about. And that's why he became an advocate for the treatment of children and the orphanage and all these things involved in life during his time. He wanted to change that. And apparently he was quite good at doing this activism. And this story is about an orphan who was in an orphanage, and once all the children were hungry, and one of the children pushed him to ask for more food. So he went to the boss and asked for more food. And the boss was not happy. So he was taken by a person and go on the street to sell this child. In that movie would be not who will buy him. Who will buy anyway, who will buy this child? Okay, they're sold on the street because he in the orphanage did not behave well. Okay, this is how terrible it was. Now this one has many more adaptations than Pickwick Paper. Many of them halfway through 1933 was the first one with sound. So we probably haven't seen any of those before. And starting with 1933, that's the one first with sound. I have seen at least the 48 one and the 68 one. 68 one is a musical. Okay, so this one was the first one I saw it came out in 1948, so I probably watched it later because I was too young at that time. Anyway, this has a colored poster, and the movie itself is black and white. It's not colored, and the director is David Lean, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about David Lean today. In 1999, the British Film Institute, that's called the BFI, just like American Film Institute is called the AFI. AFI is the agency, the organization that issues Oscar awards, and the BFI, they give out an award called the BAFTA, BAFTA. And in 1999, they made a list of top 100 British movies, top 100, and this one is ranked as 46. And later on, when we talk about David Lean, we would learn that 7 of his movies were on this list of 100 best British movies of all times. That's how great he was. It was named in the Lean. Okay. It's especially a good movie for children's movie. Yeah, they think that any children under 14 should watch this movie. Okay. And this one is the next one in 1968, which is a musical. Yeah. And I hope some of you have seen this. Have you? Okay. Yeah, Mark Lester was the boy who asked for more food. May I have more? That's what he was doing. And of course, later on, he became a regular-sized actor. But he was not very famous as an actor after he grew up. He did a few. It's not like Harry Potter. Daniel Radcliffe grew up and made quite a few movies, but he just can't act. In my opinion, he's not a good actor. I've seen quite a few of his movies. Did not like him at all. Okay, so here you could see this is Oliver Reed at the bottom. Let me see if I can point out to that. Now he is Bill Sykes in this story, and this is a guard, a person who took the child out on the street to sell. Okay, and this is Nancy, who is the girlfriend of Bill Sykes, who was actually killed by the man because of domestic violence. Okay. I did not like this movie very much, but it was all the rage. It was nominated with 11 times at the Academy Award and won 6. I don't know why people like it so much. Do you like it? So it won 6 awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Carol Reed, and an honorary award for choreographer on White. Choreographer is a person who designed dance, like George Balanchine, I guess. George Balanchine was a choreographer who came from Russia to, I think he probably defected. At that time, it's just about all the famous people in ballet would defect, like Nureyev or Baryshnikov. They were all top-notch ballet dancers in Russia. And when they came to this country to perform, they defect. Defect means 投诚, 我们说投诚, which means they became, they did not want to go back. They became citizens of this new country because there's more freedom and more money to pursue their career. So this is the word choreographer, meaning to the person who designed the dance. And the next one is called the Nicholas Nickleby. It was also adapted into quite a few movies, especially TV series, and especially BBC adaptation. You can see there were 3 in a row, 57, 68, and 77. Every 10 years, they would produce a full-length serialized version of Nicholas Nickleby. And some of them had very famous actors in it. For example, this 2001 Nicholas Nickleby, it has Charlie Hunnam, of course, as the leading role of Nicholas Nickleby, but other people are very, very famous, like Nathan Lane, Jim Broadbent, Christopher Plummer, and Hathaway, and Alan Cummings. These are all British actors, except for Nathan Lane and Anne Hathaway. These are American actors. Nathan Lane is a comedian, and he's gay. He's in a lot of like La Gage aux Fras. What is that called? Birdcage. Birdcage had Robin Williams. Yeah, Robin Williams in the leading role, but on stage it was played by Nathan Lane. And he was in the musical called The Producer. And Jim Broadbent is quite a traditional English actor. So he was in British movies instead of American. Christopher Plummer. I forgot. Christopher Plummer is also American. He is probably most famous to all of you because he was in The Sound of Music. But Alan Cummings, who is also very famous, but he's not a handsome young man, so he also always plays villains. So people haven't heard much about him, but he is a quite famous actor. And this is a next one. You see, they're a year apart. There are 2 Nicholas Nickleby, and this one also. Okay. The story centers on that. Okay. Okay. We'll just move on to the next one, which is David Copperfield. This book is out in 1850, and it's one of the later books. We call that 快肉余生路. So this first bullet says that it marks a turning point in Charles Dickens' life, because before that he's writing about a young writer, and then starting with David Copperfield, he's writing as a mature person. So the story is more nuanced with characters more colorful or vividly described. I read this book when I was probably in middle school, if not middle school, probably in elementary school. It was a huge book to read as a 翻译小说. It's not that easy to read because it's got names all very long and difficult to read. But I liked it a lot. And just like the previous story, it's about a young man, an orphan, having some very difficult times. But this one was not in an orphanage, but he grew up to be supporting an aunt. So that was difficult, but he became, I believe, an attorney and had a good life and a good wife and helping other people. So this is a very typical Dickens movies, Dickens stories about how a person struggles in a poor condition and slowly his slow social ascent. Ascent means to get up on the ladder. 就是说他在这个社会里面从很低层这样一直升上来哈。And then he became educated and had a good job and so on and help others. Yeah. These are the movie adaptations. The first one I highlighted was 1935, and that was with George Cukor. That was the first one with sound. The three before it was silent movies, and I haven't seen this movie, but George Cukor was a very famous director. Among his many works was My Fair Lady with Audrey Hepburn. And he was the director. So he had apparently a very long life. And Ian McKellen in the 1966 movie is now a very famous person. He's famous for being, of course, in many movies, but most people know him as from World, how do you say that? Of the Ring, some of the Wing, Ring. Because I forgot this word, so the Ring. Okay, so the people call this movie WOTR. Okay, that's the name of the movie. Okay. I can't believe I cannot come up with that name. Anyway, then there's 1669 was Delbert Mann, who is also a great director. And then there's 1999, which I saw recently. So we have this very old one with George Cukor. And in this story, there's a famous character called Wilkins Micawber. This apostrophe was put by me. His name doesn't have that apostrophe. That's to tell you that you should pronounce it as a Micawber. And of course, David Copperfield is a leading main character, protagonist in this story. But Micawber was a very, very funny person in this story. That's probably the most famous character in all of Dickens' movies. Stories, okay. He didn't make any movies. In all of Dickens' novels, the character that stick out most prominently is Micawber, and they had W.C. Fields playing Micawber in this very early version. And you probably haven't heard of W.C. Fields, and he was extremely famous. He was short and fat and a comic figure, bad-tempered in numerous movies and very respected. And this one was by Delbert Mann. And usually the leading character is not famous because they want a handsome young man in that. However, there are so many interesting supporting actors. They are played by famous actors such as Ralph Richardson. Ralph Richardson, he's in many movies, but if you have seen Dr. Zhivago, he played the father of the wife. You know, in this Dr. Zhivago, he had a wife, and who was played by Chaplin's
daughter.
Yeah, Chaplin, Geraldine Chaplin.
Yeah.
And Omar Sharif was Dr. Zhivago, and the lover was Julie Christie, whose name in the movie is Lara. And Ralph Richardson in that movie was the father of that Chaplin lady. Yeah, I think she's called Tony or Lori, a short name. Anyway, I forgot. So Ralph Richardson, we got rid of. And then there's Richard Attenborough, who is the main character in Jurassic Park. He was the rich old man who built that Jurassic Park. And he was also the producer and the director of Gandhi. That's his lifelong work. And he got very rewarded by Oscar for making the movie Gandhi. That's Richard Attenborough. And his brother, David Attenborough, was at BCC doing lots of nature films. If you have seen a nature film, you have seen one by David Attenborough. That's how famous he was. Like tigers, elephants, and everything else, okay? And Laurence Olivier, of course, you have heard of him, right? It was in Hamlet or Wuthering Heights, or he was in every Shakespeare movies, Richard III or Henry V. Yeah, he's probably the most famous British actor in the world ever, especially during our earlier time. There's Susan Hampshire and Wendy Hiller. Wendy Hiller, we saw her in Pygmalion, the black and white movie where she played the role Eliza Doolittle. That's Wendy Hiller. Edith Evans, I only know her as a very old lady because she was old. Okay. Michael Redgrave is a very famous movie actor, a little bit before our time. So we know his children, such as Vanessa Redgrave and Colin Redgrave and Lynn Redgrave. They are all Michael Redgrave's children. Of them, maybe Vanessa is the most famous. And Ron Moody is in this movie. I don't know which role he played, but he was Fagin in the Oliver, that musical Oliver, and he won an Oscar, Ron Moody, for playing Fagin. Fagin is the leader of the pickpocketers, again, of children, boys. He led a band of boys who go around picking pockets, 就是做扒手 So all these children having no family, they came to his place to become a pickpocket. So all these are big productions with lots of famous actors. In this movie, 1999, David Copperfield, another of the BBC production, we saw Daniel Radcliffe, who became Harry Potter in all the Harry Potter movies. But this is before Harry Potter. So he was an actor even before, he was an actor before Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe. So he probably is this child right here, playing the younger version of David Copperfield. And in this movie, he worked with Maggie Smith, Zoe Wanamaker, Imelda Staunton, Don French, and Paul Whitehouse. All these people were older actors who later became part of the Harry Potter series movies. Especially, you probably remember Maggie Smith. The other people, I don't know, but Maggie Smith, I know her from the 1960s, since she was in many movies when she was young. But nowadays, people only know Maggie Smith as an old woman. And this is another David Copperfield in 2000. And in this movie, we had Michael Richards playing Micawber. He's the one who played the Kramer in the Seinfeld series. And also we had Sally Field playing one of the roles. And I actually have seen this one. Sally Field was in a middle-aged woman being a great aunt of David Copperfield in this story. And she, because she had the bad marriage, so she did not like any men or any boys. So when David Copperfield became an orphan, and she did not like having a boy in her household. Sally Field was, in the beginning, she was a flying nun on TV. I wonder if you have seen her. She was quite popular. So she was never taken seriously when she was a flying nun because she was flying around as a nun. But then she became a serious actress, and she won Oscar as a best actress in not just once, at least twice, I think. She was in Places in the Heart. I think she won an Oscar for that. But the second one, I'm not sure. Maybe it's in the Paul Newman movie about the journalist. Lack of Absence of Malice, that is the name of that movie. When you are a journalist and you write something about a person which is bad, which maybe turn out to be not true, then that person can sue you for libel, L-I-B-E-L, which means 人身攻击或人身诽谤告你诽谤libel, that's the word, libel. So as a journalist, you are always afraid that you publish something and then you will be sued for libel. And this movie that Sally Field was in with Paul Newman, it's called Absence of Malice. That is, when you have a libel suit in court, and the testing criteria, one of the criteria is whether there is an absence of malice. If you wrote this because somebody told you something that was wrong, or you deducted something that was wrong, or whatever that was wrong, then the court will try to find out whether there is absence of malice. If you just made a mistake, then you are not liable for libel. If you have harm in your heart when you write it, that is having malice in your mind, then you can be convicted for a crime of libeling somebody. So as a journalist, you are concerned with whether the writing is truthful, of course, and sometimes when it's not truthful, you have to be judged as not having malice in your heart when you wrote it. I hope I explained it well enough. So absence of malice is a very important thing to know. And libel is another word. And then we talk about this David Copperfield. Of course, he took this name from the famous character of Dickens' movie. And he, being an expert showman, he decided to take this name as his pseudonym, his fake name. So he is a young man who is a magician, and he has such great deliverance and wonderful magic on stage that he became the most commercially successful magician in history. Okay. And he was nominated 38 times for Emmy Award and won 21 times. That is just astounding. Have you ever heard of somebody accomplishing so greatly in one field? He was just a magician. I hope you have all seen one of his magic shows. It was on TV quite often. Yeah, I've seen numerous of his shows. Of course, he was in Vegas, Las Vegas, on the stage, and he always have sold out shows there. And he was knighted by the French government, of all places, because we often see entertainers knighted by the British government, but he was knighted by the French government. He is an American. And because of what he did, that is so extraordinary. It has never happened before, never attempted by anybody. So he had 11 Guinness World Records. There's a book called the Guinness World Records, 就是金氏世界纪录. Anything that is a world record is collecting in it, and his act were mentioned in Guinness World Records 11 times because he did something extraordinary. And these are some of the things he did. The disappearance of a Learjet, which is an airplane. He was on the tarmac with a Learjet, and then he made it disappear. And he made the Statue of Liberty disappear and reappear. And he floated in the air over Grand Canyon, and he walked through the Great Wall of China, and he escaped from Alcatraz prison, which is out on an island near San Francisco. It's a maximum security prison, but now it's open for tourist visits. And he also made a section of the train, Orient Express dining car, disappear. And he also flying on stage for several minutes. These are all the things that he accomplished, among many other things. It's just so incredibly amazing. Okay, I probably have two more books to talk about. One is A Tale of Two Cities. It's called The Shuangcheng Ji. Charles Dickens wrote it in 1859. It's a historical novel about things that happened during the French Revolution. You know that during the French Revolution, anyone who's an aristocrat or in the royal family or anyway, who's rich and powerful, has to be beheaded, go to the guillotine and have the head cut off. So there are a lot of people in England who try to help them. They would try to give them shelter, help them to escape from France and come to London and then live in London, hopefully for the rest of their lives. And this is a story about such people. This father was in Bastille. You know, Bastille is a big prison in Paris where they put many political prisoners in. And the father of this story was there for, I don't know, 11 years or something. And when he got out, he went back to the daughter that he never knew or knew very little. So he and the daughter were helped by English people to go to to go to what do you say, to London, yes, to live there in London. And in the process, there were two young men who fell in love with the daughter Lucy, and the Lucy loved one of them, and the other man, because of his love for Lucy, he took the place of the Lucy's husband, and he was beheaded on the guillotine because he admitted that he was the other person. Okay, so these two persons are supposed to be looking very much alike. That's how they can switch it. So that's a story with the background of French Revolution. And it is said that this is one of the best-selling novels of all time. And these are the movie adaptations, and the one I saw was highlighted with Dirk Bogarde in 1958. That was when I was still in high school. I remember my sister Eileen loving that movie very much. We'll talk about Dirk Bogarde. It's kind of interesting too. This is a poster for that movie with Dirk Bogarde and other people in the movie. I don't know any of them. So there, he's playing Sidney Carton, while the other young man is played by Paul Guers, and he's playing Charles Darnay. So these two young men both fell in love with Lucy Manette. Okay. There's a strange thing about Dickens movies, because the leading character usually is played in the movie by somebody you don't know, but all the supporting actors are quite famous. This is Dirk Bogarde. He died like 13 years ago, and he had many lives, by which I mean he is not just an actor, he's also a novelist and a painter and a screenwriter. So we say he has many lives. And initially he was a matinee idol, which means young and handsome and attractive and probably shallow, but lots of 粉丝, Many people, especially young girls, love to go to, because they don't have enough money. So they usually go to the theater on Sunday afternoon. That's called the matinee. A matinee is a show, a stage play or a show that comes out usually at 2 p.m. on Sunday. And by people think that the audience for the matinee are probably younger and poorer and not know much. So a matinee idol is a 青春偶像, who is not considered a serious actor in other plays. Okay, but Dirk Bogarde, was initially a matinee idol, so it's a 青春偶像, but he later changed into an art house actor. Art house means the movies that are made for more serious people and very few audience. So they don't make a lot of money, but it's for the love of art that those people make those movies. So you go to the movies nowadays, there are blockbusters that wow the audience, sell a lot of tickets. And then there are art house movies that sell very few tickets, and they are usually the movies that were nominated for Oscars and so on. So art house is a very thriving sector of the movie industry, which makes very little money. So he evolved from heartthrob to icon of edginess. So in the beginning, he was a heartthrob, which means tugging people's heartstring, usually young girls. Young girls watched his movie and they fell in love with him. So this is called heartthrob, which means a person or an actor who would make your heart move very fast, flutter, your heart would flutter. as a heartthrob. But when he got older, he became icon of edginess. Edge means on the border of something. So you step on the edge of, say, a cliff or a building's balcony or whatever. That's the edge. So standing on the edge means dangerous, or you're likely to fall off. So a person who's described as an icon of edginess is a person who played the roles that are dangerous or dark or moody or inscrutable. Lots of those things are considered edginess. So in the second career, away from from movie, he wrote books. He had 7 best-selling volumes of memoirs. So his life story, his autobiography, he wrote 7 volumes. They become very popular. And he also wrote novels, 6 novels, and a volume of his collected journalism. He wrote journalistic articles, and he made a collection of them and published that. So he's a great and a successful writer as well. And he also painted. He was in the army during the World War II, and he painted some pictures of his life in the army. And one of them is in the British Museum, and many of them were in the Imperial War Museum. So these very respected museums had a collection of his paintings. So maybe you could make a point of visiting these 2 museums and see what he did. And the last one is Great Expectations, which happens to be the first movie I ever saw from Dickens' novels. This is called 孤星血泪, and the next name called 远大前程, which is closer to the name Great Expectations, but I've never heard of until today. And I believe it's a Chinese translation on the mainland. Dickens' second novel after David Copperfield to be fully narrated in the first person. So he wrote many novels, and it was toward the later part of his career that he started to write in these 2 novels in first person. So you read David Copperfield and you read Great Expectations. The writer said that he is David Copperfield, or said he is Pip. Okay, the character in this movie is called Pip, P-I-P. So Dickens is writing as the first person when he wrote these two stories, which is unusual for him. And the one I saw was the earlier one, 1946. In fact, I also saw other versions, but this first one was the first one I saw that's from Dickens, and I was greatly impressed. And it had David Lean as a director, and he was truly a great director, even when these movies were old and not in high resolution and not in color and all sorts of not favorable conditions. His movies just last and last. People loved his movies, even though they were like 60 years old. Yeah. And the other one I highlighted, it was directed by Alfonso Cuarón, which is a surprise to other people because he is a Mexican director. But he became extremely popular in this country. The one I saw was black and white. It has John Mills as a Pip as an adult. So he is an adult, and there was a child who played his younger days. And John Mills is a very well-established English actor, but because he's short, so he was not so famous as handsome young man. He also had has a family of 2 children who also became famous as actors. They are both girls. Haley Mills is famous. You probably have seen her in Parents Trap, playing the twins at the summer camp. That's John Mills. And she is more famous than her other sister. I think she's called Julie Mills. And in this movie, we had Gene Simmons as a young girl, Estella. Estella is the love interest who eventually married Pip after she grew old. But Gene Simmons played the younger version of Estella. But she herself played Miss Havisham in the same movie years later. In this story, Miss Havisham is a very important person, and you can hear people mentioning this name because they were familiar with this character. This character is an older lady who was a pretty young thing when she was getting married, and at the wedding banquet, the young man went away, never to appear again, and she was devastated. So her clock stopped at that moment. So you went to see her home, clock was set on the time the young man did not show up for the wedding, and all the tables were set with the food from that wedding banquet. So for this woman, whose name is Miss Havisham, time just stopped. When people went to see him years later, that's what he saw. And Gene Simmons played this older lady in the 1889 miniseries. I'm sure you have seen Gene Simmons. She was young and pretty in many, many, many movies. At the same time as Deborah Carr, she is a more of a younger woman, while Deborah Carr is a more a mature woman. They were both very pretty and British. For example, she was in Spartacus as a wife of Spartacus, 我们叫做万夫莫敌, the slave in Roman Empire who raised an army to revolt. At that time, Gene Simmons is already an older woman, or I would say a middle-aged woman, but she was in many younger, when she was young, she was in numerous popular movies. And Alec Guinness is also in this movie playing a supporting role, and he is very famous for at least one thing, for being the Oscar winner in the bridge on River Kwai, 贵河大桥. Yeah. So these are really famous people 60, 80 years ago. Boy. So this story, there were quite a few movies already done before that, but they were probably silent movies. And David Lean wrote the script along with, actually he hired Alec Guinness to write. We already know Alec Guinness is a pretty good actor, and well, actually, we did not talk about him much yet, but we will. Okay, so Alec Guinness wrote this story, and they had Alec Guinness was on stage with another woman called Martita Hunt, who played Miss Havisham, and they were on stage playing this movie and this play. Great Expectations, and then the same 2 people appeared in the same movie, in this movie by David Lean. And the word reprise means that you played somebody on stage and now you reprise the same role in the movie. That's what the reprise means, meaning you play the same role in a different background. These are the first of 2 films David Lean directed, and they were very well received. these two. One is a Great Expectation. The other is Oliver Twist. It won a lot of awards, and yeah, we don't have to go through that. This film, Great Expectations, was considered one of his very best movie, and it was on the list of 100 best British films. As the fifth greatest, you probably wonder if there's anyone before that. This is David Lean. It's a fuzzy picture, but I couldn't find a better one. And he was director for many movies, but not as many as you would expect, because he worked so hard. Each one took him many years to finish, and sometimes when the review was terrible, he would spend 10 years and not doing anything. So he's not so productive as some other movie people. In Which We Serve is English war movie propaganda. He did it for the love of the country. Then he did Blithe Spirit. Let me see if there's anyone I haven't seen. No, I have seen every one of these movies on this list. Blithe Spirit is a comedy about ghost, or the attempt to call a seance to get the ghost to appear. That's a very, very fun movie. Maybe you have this is called a seance. Seance. Seance is something that you would sit around the table, maybe 5 or 6 people, you would hold hand, and you would put something, maybe a Ouija board or something. And this medium means the person who can speak to 2 different worlds. Medium is the singular form, and media, we now translate it as meiti, the mei. Mei is to put 2 things together as a matchmaker, but a medium is a person who can speak to the dead and speak to the live ones. So he or she is an instrument between the 2 worlds. So this Blithe Spirit is a very funny comedy. I think it's probably written by Noel Coward, about a seance. And the actor in it was Rex Harrison when he was very young. And when he was 20 years older, he was in My Fair Lady as Professor Higgins. And The Brief Encounter is a very quiet movie about 2 very nice, decent people having an affair on the side. I have not heard of it until maybe 10 years ago, and then I got it from the library, and it's a wonderful movie, and it was number 2 on the list of the 100 best British movies. It is not something you would imagine would be so on the top of such a list. You would consider a movie would be at least like Lawrence of Arabia or things like that. But that was a very quiet and intimate black and white movie with 2 people. It is wonderful if you can get it from streaming, like Netflix or something, but I got it from the library. And the man in it was played by Trevor Howard. And The Great Expectation was the one I saw, and Oliver Twist. And The Summertime had Catherine Hepburn as someone who went to an American lady, housewife or somebody. She went to have a vacation in Italy and fell in love with a man there, played by Rossano Brasi. And that is also about affairs. So there are a lot of movies about affairs. I don't know why, like Brief Encounter, like Summertime, like Dr. Zhivago, Ryan's Daughter. These are all about people having affairs. The Bridge on the River Kwai. I think it's River Kwai. Yeah, it's K. It looks like it's spelled like Kwai, but it's Kwai, as my Vietnamese tour guide told us we should say Kui. And that probably you have all seen. That's 贵河大桥. That's a wonderful movie in which Alec Guinness played the colonel and won an Oscar for it. A well-deserved award. And Lawrence of Arabia, probably everybody has seen it with Peter O'Toole and a big cast of very popular movie stars. And Dr. Zhivago had Alec Guinness and Julie Christie in it. However, Alec Guinness is also in this movie. He's playing an official in the beginning of the movie who probably run the railroad office or something. And this young girl who came into the office, played by Rita Tushingham, was supposed to be Dr. Zhivago's daughter, because Dr. Zhivago had a heart attack on the bus. So his young girl, by Julie Christie, by Lara, became an orphan, and Alec Guinness played the brother of Dr. Zhivago. And Dr. Zhivago also had, what's the Egyptian actor's name? I just said it, but I forgot.
Omar Sharif.
Omar Sharif, yes. Yeah, when I was in Egypt at the pyramid and the Sphinx, they were together. You see pyramid in the background and Sphinx in the front. And at night, we went to that same spot and to watch the laser show. And it was narrated by Omar Sharif, because you would see pictures projected on the pyramid and here and there. That's just like a Zhang Yimou show. It's quite popular there. And Ryan's Daughter is the one about a woman, a young girl who married her teacher, whom she had a crush on, but the teacher was much older, so she had an affair with a soldier stationed nearby. And I did not like it the first time, because at that time I was still raised and had this idea that people should never have out of wedlock affairs. Yeah, you should always be faithful. So I saw that movie, I was really turned off. And as it turned out, many critics did not like that movie at all, for some other reasons as well. And eventually they very cruelly, even when they interview him, David Lean, in person, they very cruelly say, how come you made such a trashy movie? That made him just terribly upset. So for about 10 years, he didn't do anything until he did finally A Passage to India. And later on, maybe 5 years ago, I saw Ryan's Daughter again, and I liked it so very much. It's so hard, so deeply moving, because the situation, nobody did anything wrong. It's just a situation that happened. So the priest in that movie, who is an old man, also played by Trevor Howard, he was so sympathetic to this woman, this young girl who strayed, as you say, who strayed from her marriage. And I like this very much, but it's a shame that it caused David Lean to be not working on any movies for about 10 years. And of course, he returned triumphantly with A Passage to India. I don't know if you have seen it. It's 印度之旅, huh? It's very much from a perspective of an Indian person there, because everyone British around him, they look down upon British Indian locals. And this is about people's idea. There's a very enlightened idea about the people who are all equal, because all those British people who were in India, they had no such idea that everybody was equal. And this movie really deliver that message that British white people are not necessarily good, and they are actually sometimes very bad. And you could see Alec Guinness in that movie as well. But of course, the movie was the major people in that movie were many other people. And this was a story written by E.M. Forster, who also wrote the story of Room with a View and several other. And he's a very respected novelist, and he happens to be gay as well. And in this movie, you also see the old maid lady, who is maybe 40 years old in this story, who was probably not mentally there, and she accused the Indian person as having raped her, but it turns out she was just because of the heat and the cave and darkness and so on, she had a hallucination or something. So that was played by Judy Davis. And there's the older lady who is a wise old English mother, played by Peggy Ashcroft, and who in her very young days, she was in love with Paul Robeson, who's a tall, dark, handsome black man. In the 1930s, he was in Othello, playing the dark general. Yeah, all those people, when they grow old, they would be good supporting actors in famous movies. Paul Robeson is someone who you probably have heard him sing "Oh Man River, Oh Man River." That was in a stage play called The Showboat. He was in there, but because he felt the discrimination in this country, he thought that communism is a better system. So he went to it's like he defected to Soviet Union and became a big character there. And he was extremely discriminated against by the movie industry. They would have no part of a black man who claims to be a communist. He's a very, very talented person. He was a professional football player, professional baseball player, and he was a great actor and a singer, and had a miserable life. Okay, I'm closing on to Alec Guinness, I think. Yeah, this is Alec Guinness. If you have seen 贵河大桥, you would know him as in this sketch, which was drawn by someone of a portrait of the colonel in that movie. And he got to be very famous in America because of that movie, but he was famous in London for many years. And that movie had a counterpart that was played by William Holden. It's very much two different, a British character, serious and straightforward and go by the book, while the American guy is a womanizer, drinking and laughing and so on and so forth. So it's a very good sketch of the people, of the characteristic of the two countries. And he was one of the greatest British actors who, along with Laurence Olivier and John Gielgud, made the transition from theater, from film after the Second World War. So they were great stage actors doing mostly Shakespearean plays. And after the war, they all became famous in American movies, yeah. Okay, and John Gielgud is probably less known, but just as popular in England as he is in as Laurence Olivier and Alec Guinness. And I think last time when I gave you the YouTube link of the Shelley poem Ozymandias, one of them was narrated or read by John Gielgud, because he has a very good British accent. And they are all great Shakespearean actors. Don't know why I'm not having that. Okay, so I'm talking about this as my last one. I don't know why I lost my cursor on this part. So I'll just do this part then. Okay. So we had this Great Expectations and Alec Guinness. Okay. So you have seen him, and he also has sections of his life that are very, very famous. So he was known as a stage actor for years, and then he was known principally as the colonel in the bridge on the River Kwai. And then came the Star Wars. And he, between that, he also did lots of other things and won award. But then came the movie Star Wars, in which he played Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that was a totally new world for him. And so he different people of different ages would know him as someone in certain kind of movie, which could be very, very different. Okay. And these are the movies that he was in. And here was the time he was playing a British spy, very much a British spy in the Smiley movies, especially in the on TV, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So he was very well known for that. And he played maybe Hitler here. And this one was about Catholic Assisi. Okay. Francis of Assisi, in the 12th or 13th century Catholic leader of the Franciscan branch of the Catholic Church. So he played the Pope in this movie. And this is Scrooge, and he played the King Charles the First in Cromwell, where Oliver Cromwell, he was played by Richard Harris. So that was a historical movie. And Twelfth Night is a Shakespearean comedy. Dr. Zhivago had a small role in there, and Lawrence of Arabia has a small role. But he was in this one. He played an important part in this movie, which is about a prime minister called Disraeli. Disraeli was a British prime minister who happens to be Jewish, and it was said that he's the best orator the world has ever had. Very, very good, makes good speech. And nowadays, people probably think Churchill was the best orator, but before him, there was Disraeli. Here is Monsignor Quixote. I don't know if he played the Quixote, 那是唐吉诃德, but he did win an Oscar for a role in Little Dorrit. Okay, this is, I think, the last movie, Great Expectations. And we already talked about the story about Miss Havisham and the young girl Stella and so on. So we'll just go. This is a remake of that movie, and it's got Gwyneth Paltrow and Ethan Hawke. These are two quite famous people at that time. Robert De Niro probably played the escaped prisoner who became very famous, but he was helped by Pip, so he put up a scholarship through an intermediate person. So a lawyer would give out money to this young boy all the time while she doesn't know who was giving him the money. That's the story. And Anne Bancroft and Chris Cooper are also very famous actors. But this story, having a similar story as the Charles Dickens story, is actually a story in 1990s New York. So the entire story was moved to modern times. And I just mentioned this, Alfonso Cuarón is from Mexico. So he made movies in Mexico for a while, and he started out to make A Little Princess, which is a very English story. When we were young, we read stories about 小公主, 小公子, etc. This is A Little Princess. They are about orphans who were actually offspring of rich people, but they were having a poor life and how they struggle in life. So this was a British story. And then he made Great Expectations, which is unusual for a Mexican director, just like Li An was making not Pride and Prejudice, but the Sense and Sensibility. That's a vintage Jane Austen British story. So Cuarón was making a movie about Great Expectations, and then he made this movie, which is Mexican, Y Tu Mama Tambien. That was the time that he became so well known in the Western world, because people did not think a movie from such a different background can be so good. And then because he was so good as a director, he, just like Li An, he was invited to become director of blockbuster movies such as Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban. And you would imagine this is a huge money-making machine. They would hire somebody more famous, but he became so famous that he was able to be hired to be the director of Harry Potter. And then actually he got 2 Oscars for the last 2 movies. Gravity had George Clooney and Sandra Bullock. They were astronaut in space, and George Clooney died but appeared as a ghost helping Sandra Bullock. So there's a lot of special effect because they were floating in the air all the time. And Cuarón won an Oscar for Best Director, and he won the next one 5 years later, which is a purely Mexican movie about his own life growing up in Mexico, and it was in black and white as well. And that won the best probably foreign movie of the year. But he won the Best Director, not as a foreign director, but as a regular director for this movie. And you can see that in that movie, I presume he's one of the children in the family. They were living a comfortable life with cars and so on and so forth, while the Roma is the maid that does the housework in their home, very much not being respected. And now that I think about it, when we were growing up, we probably had the maids in our home, and we looked down upon them. We did not think them as equals. And that's what he was showing us in Mexican society. He growing up in the well-off family, how they treated that woman who worked so hard and was so dedicated, and the poor and so on. She actually saved their lives. So he received, I'm talking about Alfonso Cuarón, he received a 10 Academy Award nomination and won the Best Director for Gravity and Roma, Best Film Editing, and the Best Cinematography for Roma. So he, as a director, he also did editing of the movie Gravity, and he also did the cinematography, which means that the entire movie was shot by him. And he won all 3 awards. I mean, he was doing different roles. So he's a very, very versatile person. He was born in Mexico, and one of the only 4 people to be nominated for Oscar awards in 6 different categories. So they must be very, very talented to be able to handle 6 different jobs so excellently. Okay. And this is a newer one I have not seen, and it's got Ray Fine in it. When I say Ray Fine, that's his name. Ralph Fiennes, that's his name, but his name is pronounced as Ray Fine. And he was in a lot of movies, such as he is now the British spy agency's head in the 007 movie. We call it that position M. And he was in quite a few, like English Patients, or what else? Quiz show. I recently went to Seattle Center to watch a movie of him shown by SIFF. What that means, Seattle International Film Festival. It is a biography of a New York statesman called Robert Moses. That was a great show. So Ray Fine played the person that Robert De Niro played in an earlier version. He's a prisoner that escaped from the prison. Okay, and we have Helen Bonham Carter, who is the young girl in A Room with a View. You probably have seen. That was a story written by E.M. Forster, and she played Miss Havisham in this version of Great Expectation because she is older now. She was playing younger ladies. For example, she was in Sweeney Todd as Johnny Depp's wife, who kills people who came to their barber shop. But she was in many other more pleasant movies. Okay, this is all for today. Oh my God, I'm glad I skipped all those that I prepared. Okay, I didn't know it's that late. But I want you to know that our next movie will be Thornton Wilder's Our Town. If you go to YouTube, you can find many, because it's often a high school production with no props, no set, just people walking on the stage and telling the story. So it's a fun thing to watch because there is this so-called the stage manager who stood next to the stage, and he is telling you the entire story. And the first one, Our Town, had William Holden as a young man growing up, while in the second version we had Paul Newman playing the stage manager. So they're in two different roles. Okay, and of course in 2003 Paul Newman was pretty old. He probably died 5 years later. But you can also find numerous others, especially one was from Lincoln Center, so that could be that is a very decent production, but many of them were just high school productions. They want to put it out there. They are not necessarily worth watching. So your key would be to look for the name William Holden or Paul Newman or Lincoln Center. And this would be on March 15th because I'll be out in February. But I will give the class on February 1st. I think it's February 4th. Anyway, there will be a next class in February in the beginning, and then I'll be gone. Okay, do you have anything else to say?
No, but that one title you were looking for, the first word, is that Lord of the Rings?
Yes, Lord of the Rings. So it should be L-O-T-R. Lord of the Ring. Yeah, I can't believe I can't come up with that. Lord of the Rings. So people would say L-O-T-R because it's too long. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I can always count on you to remind me of it if I forget. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
I enjoyed this movie. I think it's a pretty decent movie to watch,
Mhm.
especially coming from all these famous people.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
OK，谢谢，and 新年快乐。
Yeah, 新年快乐.
Thank
It will be the Saturday, coming Saturday.
Yes，
That's a New Year's
谢谢
Eve.
老师。
Yeah, 不客
谢
气。
谢。OK，拜。
Bye. Let me just turn it off. I don't know where. Let me see. I lost it. Okay. I guess I'll just have to. Oh, here. Okay, stop share. I have stop share and